Hello, my name is Hakon and welcome back to my channel where today I will say a few words about poetry and specifically about my own poetry. The thing is, as you might know if you have been watching this channel, is that I love poetry, I love reading poetry, I love reciting poetry, I love talking about books in general and subjects that have to do with literature. But it might not be as obvious that I also love writing poetry. Even though it must be said that it has been quite a few years since I wrote much in the ways of poetry. With one exception, there was a few years ago I entered my first and so far only poetry competition, for which I had to write a new one, and the competition I actually won, which is a whole other story and a whole other video that I will get to some other time. The thing is that my main poetic period, as it were, as a creative, my main creative output was writing from November 1992 until the end of 1999. So that's quite a while ago now. It's like a quarter of a century. Shows my age, I guess. Anyway, so during that time, that was what I wanted to do. I wanted to write, I wanted to be a poet, I wanted to, yes, write poetry. And of course it was lots of reasons why I got into writing poetry and why I actually committed myself so much to it, and I will get back to that in future videos as well, because this is just a short mission statement and vlog kind of video, where my main point is that even though I have published 293 videos on YouTube, either me reading poetry, reciting poetry, or talking about literature and books, only one of those videos features a poem that I wrote myself, and that is my Earl Grey tea brewing tutorial, my Earl Grey tea-torial, as I called it. And that poem is not very representative of my creative output as a poet, because it was written specifically for that video, for that specific purpose, and whereas my other poetry is quite different, certainly in its motivation, even though sometimes it's going to be similar in its poetic style, that is the versification, the rhythm, the rhymes, that sort of thing. But it's sort of a glaring omission from my channel that I've only got one video featuring my own poetry, especially considering how much I've written. There are two reasons for this. One is, of course, that your own poems can be quite personal and revealing, I think. It's one of those things that when you write poetry, especially about your own feelings, as you often do, because it's one of the main motivations for writing poetry is to process emotion, I think. And I'm getting into something I said I was going to say in the future video, but I'm not going to be too specific now. One of my main motivations for writing poetry was to define and understand my own emotions at a time when they were in a little bit of turmoil, let's put it like that. Which means that it sort of makes you feel a little bit exposed and naked, perhaps, the expressions that sometimes come out through the poems, in a way that visual artwork, which is what I moved on to afterwards, doesn't, or it certainly doesn't have to the same extent. Because in the early noughties, in the early 2000s, I started drawing and painting, and so that took over a lot of my creative effort and time, and I ended up going through, leaving the poetry phase behind a little bit and then moving on to the art phase of my life. Both creative things, of course, creative output still being a necessary thing in my life, but I go through these phases. But going back to the poetry again, so I want to make more videos about my poetry back from those days, and I'm going to say something probably about my motivations. I might say that. I might say something about technique and expression. I might say how to write a poem, how to read a poem, and also read my own poetry, just sharing that and the expression in it without too much other things around it, just like I've done with Shakespeare, with Spenser, with some other poets. And the thing is that I want to republish my poems. Now, back in 2006, I published 3 books, 3 volumes of poetry, 2 in English, 1 in Norwegian, the other way around, that's the Norwegian one. Self-published through lulu.com online, and no longer available in print. Not because lulu.com doesn't exist anymore, I do believe they do, and still thriving, I think. But the reason is that about 10 years ago, I started on the project of editing my poems, and I ended up rewriting, or, well, what I think would call improving, you never know, some of my old poems that actually were in these books. And so I thought that I shouldn't have them available until I've gone through them all and were happy with them at this stage of my life, when I knew a bit more and thought that I could improve them a little bit. So that means that at the moment my poetry collections are not available to buy. If you are in Norway, I do believe that this is available in the National Library. This is Et tre står her i parken. A tree is here in the park, which is my Norwegian poetry collection, and that is available through the National Library, I think, because it is registered there as a digital book. Not freely available. It is available as a sort of research material if you have that kind of account with the National Library. So yeah, not for everyone. Although I did send an email to them a while back requesting that it be available as a normal library book, but that hasn't. I haven't looked more into that since, because they were changing their systems. Anyway, I'm digressing now. So at the moment, not available. I want to make them available on Amazon, because that is where books are available and where people can buy them. And I also need to continue that process that I started 10 years ago of editing my poems, and also picking out all those, or some of those poems that are half written, half finished, unfinished, or finished but need improving, that are not in these books, which is most of my poetry, and working on those. And the way that YouTube works for me is that I tend to make videos about things that I'm doing. So it's sort of a motivation that goes 2 ways. I make videos about poetry, and then I work on poetry, and so I make videos about it. And so that's a kind of a feedback loop going on, which I hope to get started when it comes to my own poetry, and sort of getting the inspiration to work on that. Because in many ways, and this might sound a little bit sort of pompous and self-important, but I feel that subjectively, I feel that my poetry is my biggest and most significant contribution to human culture, rather than what I've been doing since. My visual arts and my music, I don't feel that they're as important culturally as my poetry. I don't know why that should be, but that is what I feel about my own poetry anyway. I feel it is more important. I feel it is of a well, not all of it, obviously, of a certain quality that has merit. So that is really what I wanted to talk about today in this little video. That is, I do apologize for that, of course. It is, as usual, unscripted and a little bit rambling, but that is the way I make videos, and I hope you're used to it by now. So my mission statement for this video is that I want to work more on my poetry. I want to make more videos about poetry, both my own poetry, reciting it, talking about it perhaps, a little bit about the process. Maybe something that I also wanted to make videos about are the philosophy of aesthetics. This is a subject that comes up a lot the last few years, particularly when there's been a lot of talk about AI and AI art, is that almost any discussion about AI art, it seems that most contributors to those discussions they lack the fundamental understanding of what art actually is. And if you don't understand what art is, how can you discuss what AI art is and isn't? So that's one thing that I feel also is related to poetry, because what is poetry? And I think poetry might actually be one of the best examples to use when trying to describe what art in general is. And therefore it's something that I will probably broach on as a subject in one of my videos coming up on the subject of poetry and my own poetry. So I think I'll leave you with that today, hoping some of your appetites might be whetted by the idea of there being more poetry content coming your way on this channel. For others, it might be another reason for you to unsubscribe and switch off. That is fine. It's your prerogative. You can do whatever you like. I don't mind whether I have subscribers or not. I don't mind whether I have likes or not. And I don't mind whether I have views or not, because the important thing for me, although I do love the interaction, with my audience, and I do love the likes and the positive feedback, the main thing for me is still as YouTube as a form of self-expression. So sometimes you just feel the need to get something out there and feel that you have expressed something of yourself, and that in itself feels good. And that also is part of the story of course, of why I published these poetry collections in the first place, and why I want to publish them again. It's important to me as well as a person to have that sense of self-expression. And if it then just happens to be something that speaks to others, that they get some kind of experience from, that feels important to them, then all the better. But it's no guarantee, and of course it's not a given, it's not a necessity for me anyway, but it's nice. Right, so I'll leave you with that, and thank you for watching this, and I hope to see you in my next one, and until then,